It's a good day to be black.
It is a good day to be black.
Black, 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 black.
Absolutely.
Long as the orange hair guy is not around.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But we're counting the days. We are
Yes.
counting the days.
Yes, Lord.
Justice may be denied, but delayed, but it will not be denied.
You want some?
Yes, sir. Delayed but not denied. You're right.
That's right.
And right now, he probably he wants out too.
Not as bad as we want them out.
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to give folks just another minute or so to join us. I know a few more folk are coming. I hope everybody is well. And we're going to jump in. I got a lot for us to talk about tonight, so I want to not delay us so we can get done on time. But I just want to give folks one more minute to kind of show up so that they don't miss anything. And we will go ahead and get started. Somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, what did my background say? And I realized that one of the words was cut off. But this is what it said: a faith that does justice.
I'm like, when did this table start speaking?
Sorry about that.
I decided to find one that was easier to read.
That's nice, sir.
Yeah, we are people that believe our faith ought to do justice. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. It is 7:03, and I want to go ahead and jump in. So let's have a word of prayer. Would you please join me? Eternal and loving God, we give you thanks for our time together tonight. Thank you for sparing us another day. Thank you for the ups and downs of this day. But God, in all that has happened, we do give you honor and glory and praise because in everything we've experienced, not just this day, but in days past, we know that you have been the source of our strength and our
Yes, sir.
joy, and everything that has helped us make it thus far. So we love you, we praise you, and we ask for your power of your Holy Spirit to please join us tonight as we attempt to wrestle with a few more things out of the scriptures that will help us live a better life. Our prayer, our desire is that we not just be hearers. We are not here to become better students. We're here to be better disciples. So let us not be hearers, but doers, so that we might look like, act like, walk like, and talk like you. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to invite you to go back to our text. This lesson is going to stretch out over the next 2 weeks. I know that I'm not going to finish it tonight. We started in John chapter 19, verse 28 to 30. And I just want to read it again to kind of refresh your memory. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order for the scriptures to be fulfilled, I am thirsty. A jar of full of wine vinegar was standing there. So they put a sponge full of wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. We started our conversation talking about the cross, and I'm going to continue in the next couple of weeks talking about the cross, the work of the cross. We talked about that Jesus's journey to the cross was a chosen path. He knew why he had come to earth. He knew exactly what he was doing on his way to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the center of religious authority. It was the center of political power. And he knew that his message had threatened both political power and religious authority, but he was going there to do his Father's bidding. And so we talked about the crucifixion of Jesus being a public tool of terror. We considered that state-sponsored terror is what Jesus had given into when he allowed himself to be crucified. We compare that state-sponsored terror to state-sponsored terrors that we have lived through in our lifetime. Terror in the United States, such as lynchings and mass incarceration and other forms of terror that were directed at us and people like us. We ask questions about what the cross meant to you and how did it change understanding crucifixion as a public terror. How did it change your way of thinking about the cross? We compared the cross of Jesus' day to things like its public display, which was meant to show bodies exposed as a warning by the empire to anybody who would threaten the empire, as a spectacle that crowds watching normalize the violence, as dehumanization, where victims were stripped of their dignity and identity, and as a form of control, violence used to enforce a social order. All of these things are things that we've seen in our lifetime. We've seen particularly in the South, but in other places. The labels that were put on people who were crucified. Jesus had a label above his head that said King of the Jews. It wasn't written there to identify him. It was written to mark him and to criminalize him, because it was a crime to be a king in the Roman Empire. It was also heresy for him to claim to be the Son of God. And so all of these things came together in that label, King of the Jews. But we watch young people, particularly young Black men, being labeled in our society as thugs. We watch Middle Eastern people, brown people, being labeled as terrorists. We watch people who come from the southern border. You notice how it's never the eastern or northern border. People come through Ellis Island freely, but the folk who come in at Texas and Arizona and the southern border are labeled as illegals. We talked about legal systems that justify and dish out harsh punishment to poor people and people of color. We talked about the fact that crucifixion was meant to protect systems, even at the cost of human life. We also had a chance to talk about what sin was, that the cross was God's way of reconciling human beings back to God's self, and that the cross represented the place where sin was destroyed and where the work of liberation began. The reality of the cross is it shows us the cost of redemption. And we talked about how everybody was in need of that redemption. Romans 6:23 reminds us that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. I'm sorry, that's 3:23 and 6:23. Yeah. Sin is not just personal failure. It's broken relationship. And we spent some time last week talking about broken relationship relationship between us, humanity, and God, broken relationship between us and each other, and broken relationships between humanity and creation. And we spent quite a bit of time last week talking about our brokenness when it comes to creation. And so I want to kind of take us back there and ask you to just answer a couple of questions for you. I sent them to you ahead of time, and this is how it goes. If sin is not just personal failure, but it's broken relationship between us and God, between us and each other, between humanity and creation, sin didn't just mess up one thing, it broke everything. We started hiding from God. That is proof of our brokenness with God. We started hurting each other. That's our brokenness between us. But even the ground beneath our feet began to feel the weight of our consequences, of our choices. The Bible shows that brokenness is spiritual, relational, and environmental. But the good news is that God did not come to just save souls. God is restoring all of creation. At the cross, our broken relationship with God is addressed. Our violence against each other is exposed, and even creation responded at the day of the crucifixion. The Bible teaches us that the darkness fell upon the earth, and earthquakes was all throughout the land. All three broken relationships met and began to heal. So the question that I asked you earlier, that I sent to you earlier, and that I want you to think about and answer for me now is, where do you see brokenness in creation around you right now? Where do you see brokenness in creation around you right now?
Pastor Strait,
Yeah.
it is throughout our community, brokenness toward each other. In Chicago, as a matter of fact, it's brokenness, West Side versus South Side. There's all kind of brokenness, and they take those things seriously.
Yeah.
And so, oh,
I'm going to ask you all, if you're not talking, put yourself on mute. Thank you. Yes, so that brokenness exists in our relationship toward each other in multifaceted ways.
yes,
right?
sir.
You know, we see brokenness not just between Black folk and white folk. We see brokenness between men and women. We see brokenness between parents and children. We see
Yes.
brokenness in so many different ways. And I wonder if you can now. So let's step outside of our human relationship and tell me about creation. Where do you see that brokenness in ways that it impacts the earth?
I would say the way the weather has been shifting,
Yeah.
so it's not seasonable really. When you look at, we can have 4 seasons in one day, and then all the storms, um, that have been occurring, the
Yeah.
earthquakes, the tornadoes, the hurricanes in different parts of the world as well as here.
And where do you think that the problem for that brokenness in the earth? And I agree with you 100%. When we look at the environmental changes, when we look at the thing that everybody denies, that climate change, they say, "Oh, that's not real." You know, where do you see that being connected to the way we behave? Where does
Not
artificial intelligence?
respecting the earth,
Yeah,
destroying with pollution.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I would even say with all the space travel, breaking the ozone layers, with all of that is having an effect on our environment.
yeah. And we never think these things through, do we? We always
No.
jump in head first and then, look back at the mess we've made and then try and figure out how to undo it. And sometimes there is no way to undo it. I give you a great example, I think, that's going on right now, and that is, artificial intelligence. The Congress
Mhm.
have been warned by many scientists to say, hey, we don't know what we're doing here. Artificial
Mhm.
intelligence is a great thing. However, we don't need to go so far so fast. But nobody's putting the brakes on it to say, hey, and I know it's a thing of science fiction to think that machines can take over the world, but we don't know
Mhm.
whether or not that's possible. And as artificial intelligence become more and more intelligent, we who created the thing ought to be thinking about, how far will it go once we no longer have control? The same thing is absolutely true about climate change, right? We didn't care at the damage that we've done, the number of species that have been destroyed, that are extinct now. We didn't care about the way that we are destroying the icebergs, and the um, ice caps in the north are melting and creating flooding in parts of the world. We didn't care. We wanted the oil. We wanted to drill, to frack. We wanted to do all the things that did what? Make us money. And making money is so often at the root of our desire, so that we don't give any kind of credence to what the outcome might be. Does anybody else have a what
Yes,
oh,
I do.
yes,
Also, just to speak on what you was talking about, the environment, like even bioengineered foods, you know,
yeah,
uh, that's something that I am conscious now to read the label to make sure that I don't purchase the products that I used to purchase when I see that bioengineered food
yeah.
label on that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And these things will many times kind of sneak into our consciousness as a way to help, right? So, bioengineered food is a way to grow more food so that the world population will be fed. But when you look underneath the surface, it's never about that. It's always about, at the root of it all, is usually greed. How can I make more money? I can make more money by bioengineering these seeds and these feeds so that I feed animals. And I'm sorry to go a little bit off here, but it's really connected. So if I keep these animals all caged into these places where I give them antibiotics to try and keep them healthy, I keep them stacked up on top of one another. I don't need as much land. I don't need as much grass and so forth and so on, and I can make more money. But I don't give any thought to whether or not the animals are being harmed while they're being caged that way. We don't give any thought to whether or not disease will spread from animal to people. We don't give it, we just know that it'll make me more money. And the same is true with the bioengineering of seeds and plants and even animals for that matter. The more I can make out of it, the better it is. And there's no thought, or not nearly enough thought, given to whether or not this is harming the environment, harming the earth, and harming the people who will consume this stuff. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I do the same thing. I won't buy products that have the label. And I thank God that the orange person in DC haven't required the removing of labels that say that they're bioengineered. Because that's the next step, right? If you don't know something is manufactured in that way, then you can't avoid it. So yes, that's a wonderful example. Anybody else?
Yes,
Yes,
Reverend
sir.
Scott.
I'm
So
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Go,
Go
who
ahead,
me?
Tracy.
It's
Okay.
Roberta. Okay,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay. I'm sorry. This will be real quick. I'm sorry, real quick.
Go ahead.
What about, I was just thinking about the animal waste that goes into our drinking water, that goes into our
Oh,
soil,
geez.
that affects us. We end
Yeah.
up with all these diseases, cancer, and so forth,
Yes.
for the exact reason, like you said, because of greed.
Yes. 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 Because there are eco-friendly ways to do business, right? We're not talking about running people out of business. This is not a part of the conversation. There are ways where you can be responsible corporations and make sure that you destroy waste in a way that does not, first of all, if you feed animals the right kinds of nutritious foods, the waste can be recycled. It can be used as fertilizer and other things that are good for the planet. But when the waste is full of bacteria and antibiotics, and when you slaughter in ways where the blood and other parts of the animal are just tossed out into the rivers and the streams, as opposed to being placed in eco-friendly environments, then you harm the earth and people, all because you don't want to spend a little extra money. And it doesn't run you out of business. It simply means you don't make quite as much money. And let me say this about corporations and money making. None of these corporations who refuses to pay living wages, who refuse to clean up the environment when they have spills and so on, we're not talking about the difference between whether they are run out of business or not. We're just talking about whether they make $10 gazillion or just $3 gazillion. And so that you're absolutely right. Greed is behind so much of what happens that make us unsafe and make the environment an unsafe place to live. So Roberta, I'm going to go to you, and then Miss Linda to you.
Yes, sir. Happy Wednesday, everyone.
Hey,
I, I thought about how our gas has changed, our petroleum. I remember as a kid, the gas smell would be so strong that it will make my head and my stomach hurt. Now the gas doesn't even smell like gas, and I think it's because they dilute it with water and but still raising the prices.
everything that we seem to be able to get in the marketplace is worse, but yet, when I say worse, I mean less, but yes, we pay more, right? So to your point, I hadn't noticed that, but what I had noticed is that a $5 bag, a 5 pound bag of sugar is no longer 5 pounds, but we pay more for it than when it used to be 5 pounds. All of that is not about the rising costs of doing business. It is about, I can trick these people into looking at this bag that is shaped the same way a 5 pound bag used to be shaped, is looks the same way as a 5 pound bag used to look, and I can charge them more money for it. And therefore, I increase my profit margin. It's all about profit. That is in part why 1% of this nation's wealthiest people own 90% of the wealth. And the rest of us are somewhere in that 10%. That is just unrealistic, right? It doesn't make sense. But these are the ways, when you add up all these things that we're talking about, these are the ways that happen. Because when you look, at big corporations, most of it is in the hands of a very few people, right? And these few people control how all of what we do happens, or what we get, what we buy, how we live. All of that is controlled by just a few people. That's why these huge mergers are really important, and we should pay attention. When all of the companies are owned by you, and I'm going to stop on my tirade, but I just want to point this out to you. Remember when there was like 10 different brands, major brands of grocery stores? There was Dale Farms and Red Rooster, and I know I'm dating myself, but and there was Jewel, and there was Dominick's, and there was just a number of them. Do you know now there's really in Chicago, and I'm just talking about in Chicago, there's really one major food chain. Jewel, Mariano's are owned by the same people. What other food chain is there besides Whole Foods and maybe Trader Joe's, which are not food chains in our communities, right? So we have really no choice. And when you have no choice, it means that people can charge whatever they want to charge. And that's what you got to pay. And that means that all the things that we've been talking about, all these, yes, that's another one. All the things that we've been talking about, means we don't have any control over it. We cannot say, you know, I'm not going to buy from you because you are not eco-friendly. You are not doing things that will keep the planet and me safe, because we don't have any choices. So it really does matter. It matters that all of these companies are owned by one large conglomerate for the most part. All right. So, Miss Linda, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to comment. Pretty much everyone has said everything, and I totally agree. It's just one thing I just wanted to comment on that I think humanity has kind of missed the place, dropped the ball, is that being a part of God's creation, He's made us stewards of His creation. And He
Yeah.
wants us to protect His creation, to care for it, and not abuse it. And we've dropped the ball there. So being
Yeah.
part of creation, we must be stewards of God's creation.
Yes, thank you so much for that, because it actually takes me back to where I wanted to go with this, and that is that we play a part, right? Being stewards is our responsibility. God has given us that responsibility toward the earth. God has also called us to make sure that we hold people accountable who are not doing it. So the question becomes, what sacrifices must we make in order to do that job of stewardship? It does cost you something. When you, I'll give you this little tiny example. I refuse to buy eggs anymore that are not cage free, because of the inhumane ways that chickens are cooped up and they can't roam free, and it causes them great pains to be locked up like that and used just as little factories to create eggs. So when I buy eggs, I buy cage-free eggs. At least they tell me that the chickens can roam around and not be locked up. That costs a little more than buying the eggs that are, 99 cents a dozen, whenever they're 99 cents a dozen, because most of the time they cost a whole lot more than that. That costs a little more. That's a sacrifice on my part, because trust me, I don't have a whole bunch of money, but I have to decide, how am I going to spend that money and what am I going. So we have to be intentional in our stewardship, and we also have to be willing to make sacrifices. I know you all know it. I say it as often as I can. It's my favorite quote from Dr. King. It says that human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertion and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. So we have to be intentional. We have to know it's going to cost us something. So stewardship, sacrifice, and then knowing that what I can do to make a difference matters. What I can do matters. I can monitor how often I'm going to wash my car, for example, because that uses water. I can recycle my cans and paper goods. It might mean, buying another container, making an extra trip out to the garbage. It might mean some extra thing on my part, but that's a thing that I can do. I can do that. So what can I do? I'm willing to engage in sacrifice. I'm willing to take seriously my role as a steward. All right. I asked you to be prepared to answer a couple more questions, but if I do that, we're not going to get through any more of this lesson, and I want to go forward. So unless somebody's got something pressing they want to say, I'm going to move forward with our discussion tonight. So the thing that we ought to be clear about is that sin always produces death. Spiritual death, and as well as relational death and communal death. The next question that I think we should logically ask is, what can we do about sin? Now, Hebrews 9:22 says this, so write this down. Hebrews 9:22 says that without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin. Now, I want to stop here and I want to go a little bit deeper into this. Why is there a need for the shedding of blood? The epistle to the Hebrews is written to a community wrestling with how Jesus relates to the Jewish sacrificial system. So let's start there. The writer of Hebrews is really talking about how Jesus relates to the Jewish sacrificial system. In Hebrews 9, the writer is describing the tabernacle system, the role of priests, the use of animal sacrifice for purification. So when we hear without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin, it's not creating a new rule. It's summarizing how the old covenant already functioned. In Leviticus 17:11, God says, the life of the flesh is in the blood. It's the blood that makes atonement for the soul. So blood is not about gore, it's about life itself. When blood is shed in sacrifice, it's symbolizing one, a life given, two, the seriousness of sin, which disrupts life, and three, the cost of restoring relationship with God. Sin is not just a mistake, it's a disruptor of life, justice, and covenant. I want to say that again. Sin is not just a mistake, it is the rupture of life, justice, and covenant. Now, buckle up your seatbelts. I'm going to make another detour from the detour, but I'll get back to it in a minute. I want to talk about sin as a rupture of life, justice, and covenant. So sin disrupts, diminishes, and destroys life, the very thing that God breathed into us. In Genesis chapter 4, sin turns jealousy into murder, and life is taken at a brother's hand. This is the story of Cain and Abel. In John chapter 10, Jesus says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. In Luke chapter 10, the Good Samaritan is the story that Jesus tells. And I like it because this story shows us how sin is not just what we do, it's also what we fail to do. So in the story of the Good Samaritan, that's Luke chapter 10, verses 30 to 37, the robber physically attacks a man. Life is directly threatened and diminished. Indifference allows death. The priest and the Levite choose not to act. Sin shows up as neglect, not just action. And then religious purity laws and social division likely influences the choices that the priest and the Levite makes. Sin is not just personal, it's shaped by systems and culture. Remember, we talked about that earlier. Sin disrupts life in two ways. One, direct harm. That's what the robbers did. Two, passive neglect. That's what the priest and the Levite who walked by did. Both leave that man on the roadside closer to death than to life. In the story, Jesus flips the question that's asked by him, who is my neighbor? He flips it to, will you be a neighbor? In other words, sin is not just breaking rules, it's failing to protect and restore life when we have the chance. Now, that's what we've been talking about when we talk about the disruption between us and God, the disruption between us and neighbor, the disruption between us and the environment, us and creation. This we have to label as sin. I don't care what the administration calls it. I don't care what rich folk call it. We've got to call it sin. Here's some examples that I want for us to think about is we're called to disrupt sin and be a good neighbor. Gun violence in our community is sin. It's not, and we can't focus on the sinner. We cannot focus on and try and point the finger at the person pulling the trigger. We've got to focus on the thing, which is gun violence. We have to focus on the idea that we have systems in place that could control gun violence. United States of America leads gun violence in the world. There are other countries all around the world that don't have systems in place like we do, and therefore control their gun violence. Systems that deny health care and resources, we've got to call them sin. That's what they are. When we sit back and allow people to be sick and to have health care facilities not available to them in their communities, or to have resources that can heal them and take care of them, we've got to call it sin. Addiction and disrepair that drains life from individuals. We need to call addiction a health condition and not a thing of personal accountability, and then call it sin when we don't fund enough clinics and enough resources where people with that health problem can get help. Sin always moves in the direction of death, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual. Sin also disrupts justice. Sin distorts what is right and fair. It creates imbalance and oppression. I'll give you some biblical examples first. In Exodus 1, Egypt's oppression over the Jews. Power is used to enslave and exploit. In Amos chapter 5, verses 11 and 12, the poor are trampled while the wealthy prosper. Don't we see that today? In Micah 6, verse 12, the rich are full of violence, their tongues speak lies. Let me bring it home in a more modern example for us. Economic inequality that keeps poor people in poverty is the way that sin disrupts. Mass incarceration and racial injustice is sin, and it disrupts our community. Black people only make up 13% of the US population, but we make up 40% of the people in jail. Black Americans are disproportionately represented among people with felony convictions. In our conversation with the Justice League last week, we were talking about the fact that our state's attorney has lowered the retail theft price from $1,000 to $300 before it's considered a felony. These are the ways in which Black folk are disproportionately represent the people with felonies. Retail theft. I'm not saying that Black folk steal more than white folk. That is not true. But guess who gets prosecuted more than white folk? Black people do. And when the retail theft rate for a felony is only $300, that means all you got to do is take one pocketbook or one something else, and you can be at the $300 mark for a felony. Felony convictions are huge because they mean that you can't get a job in many places. It means that you can't get an apartment in some places. It means that you can't go to school in some places. It means that you can't get financial assistance in some places. And all of that disrupts community and leads to ways that poor people, Black and brown people, are disproportionately represented in all of those spaces where we're disproportionately represented. Policies that protect power instead of people is sin. Sin doesn't just hurt individuals, it builds systems that harm whole communities. And then sin ruptures covenant. Sin breaks trust. between us and God and us and each other. In Genesis 3, humanity breaks trust with God. You know the story. In Samuel 11, trust is broken by betrayal and the abuse of power between David and Bathsheba. In Jeremiah 31, God says, they broke my covenant, though I was their husband. We break our relationship with God in the way that we behave personally. So, how does that show up today for us? In broken marriages, broken friendships, broken communities, churches that do harm rather than to heal. What do you mean by that, preacher? Well, I'm glad you asked me. Churches that claim that the President of the United States, who goes out of his way to harm immigrants, to disenfranchise marginalized people, to cut benefits from the federal government to poor people. Churches that say he's an emissary of God. Church people who say that all of the lies and all of the problematic behavior of his is okay because God has chosen him. This is sin. Leaders betraying the trust of the people. It's sin. So, sin fractures relationship, trust, and belonging. Sin, I want to repeat, is not just doing something wrong. It breaks what God created to be whole. It disrupts life. It distorts justice, and it damages relationship. It shows up in what we do personally, but it also shows up in the systems that we build and maintain. As a person of faith, as people of faith, we must call these systems out in our country, in our community, as sin. When we formed the Justice League at New Covenant, it was not to become politically active. It was to stand up to immorality. It was to stand up to those who would harm the least among us and say that this is not what our God teaches us. This is not what the Bible teaches us. We must be the voice of God that cries out, this is not right, and we want to be held to a higher standard in this country. At the cross, life is taken, Jesus is killed, justice is violated, an innocent man is condemned, covenant is strained, betrayal, denial, abandonment. The cross gathers all three ruptures rather, in one place. But then look at God. God restores life through the resurrection. God exposes injustice. The innocent was crucified. And then God renews covenant because Jesus cries out for us, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When we talk about sin, we're not just talking about mistakes. We're talking about rupture. Sin tears at life. It twists justice. It breaks relationships. And when you look at the cross, you see all of that in one moment. Life is taken, justice is denied, and trust shattered. But you also see God stepping into the rupture to heal what we could not fix on our own. Like in the case of the man laying on the roadside half dead, I want to ask you this question. Where might we be walking past situations caused by sin where life is being diminished? And what would it mean to stop and respond? I started a little while ago with the story of the Good Samaritan. Where might we be walking past situations caused by sin? All of the things that I've just talked about, that is sin, where life is being diminished. And what would it mean for us, for you, for me to stop and respond? So I want to give you a minute to respond to that question. Anybody got an answer right off the top of your head?
I put it in the chat. When we walk past the homeless.
Yes, yes. And I also want to be, I want to be very clear too, and thank you so much for that, Dr. Kim. The homeless are not on the streets just by personal choice. Nobody wakes up one morning and say, you know what? I don't think I want to live at home no more. I want to just go out and live in a tent in Chicago in the middle of the winter. Homelessness is also very much shaped by systems that don't allow people access. You know, as Black folk in Chicago, we know all too well what redlining looks like, right? Not being able to buy a home in certain neighborhoods, not being able to amass wealth, not being able to have generational wealth that we can pass down. All of those things lead to an individual being homeless. You are much less likely to be homeless when you've had a grandparent that leaves a house to your parents, and a house, your parents leave a house to you, and so forth and so on. You are much less likely because you've got something to build on. Whereas if you are inundated by systems that don't allow you to build that wealth, then you are on your own every generation. And so how much likely, and God forbid, you should add something like addiction or mental health to that cycle. How much more likely are you to end up homeless? So homelessness is not just an individual choice. And when we pass by homeless people, we're not just passing by people, we're passing by what systems do in our community and not responding to both of those things. The individual need, and I really want to admonish you. I'm not saying that acknowledging system and systematic damage excuses us from helping individual brothers and sisters when we see them in need. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying we got to be a both and community. We've got to help and we've got to find ways. That's why we got a food pantry at New Covenant. It's not because we don't recognize that people are hungry and we need to be able to meet that immediate need, but we've also got to address the root causes of hunger in this country. Rosa, you have your hand up.
On any given Sunday going into church, we walk past some.
That's
Somebody.
right. Somebody. And listen, it's not always an individual, right? We walk past vacant lots in our community. We walk past abandoned buildings in our community. That represents infrastructure that has not been invested in. So you're 100% right. Every time we drive into our community and our community suffers from blight, we walk past systematic sin that has been created intentionally in our communities. It is intentional that the city did not and continues not to invest in our community. There's no reason why, the north side can be replenished with resources and the south side and the west side struggle. No, it's intentional. And so, yes, you are 100% correct. Every time we go to church, we pass by something that reminds us of what it is that we need to be considerate of and the sin that diminishes community. Somebody else? So what would it look like for us to stop and respond? What does that mean for us?
To me, when you stop and respond, you start building community. you find out what your neighbors needs, and then there's communication, and and then you start telling your other friends, and then they tell their friends, and then you start a whole little uh I can't find the word, but a community neighborhood, like the way, kind of like the way we used to be. We used to take care of each other. When people used to say, can you go down to Miss So and So and get a cup of sugar, we that was normal
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the neighborhood.
yes. I love that. The idea of being um, intentional about restoration in our community. I love that. You're 100% correct. And it takes that intentionality on our part, right? It takes calling your friend and saying, did you know about such and such? And we can get together. And let me tell you all, the Justice League is in need of more members and more education. We're planning an event where we are going to do a teach-in for the community where we will talk about the issues around us. But this is not just a Justice League issue. This is a new covenant. This is a community event where we will come together to say, did you know so and so was such and such is going on? And did you know that if we did X, Y, and Z, we can make an impact on that? So, Yolanda, you're 100% correct. Being intentional about community, knowing what's going on, and then not just knowing what's going on, but saying, hey, I can do this. And then not keeping it to yourself, reaching out to your friends and family and saying, hey, y'all, we can do X, Y, and Z. And maybe friends and family are the folk that you go to church with, right? A movement may start with one person, but one person can't be a movement. It takes all of us. And we can start, and then we can build, and we can become something that is the exact opposite. Jesus died on the cross. And believe it or not, that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the cross and its effect in our lives and in our community. But that death on the cross was the catalyst to creating the whole Christian church, which is now the largest denomination in the world. One man, one thing, and it came to what we are now. Your involvement, your intentionality around making a difference can create a movement that has no end. Somebody else? All right, I'll get back to our lesson. So I'm going to move from this detour and go back to Hebrews 9. I know you thought I had forgotten about it. Why is there a need for bloodshed? When blood is shed in sacrifice, it symbolizes, and I said this to you before, a life given. It shows the seriousness of sin, which disrupts life. It shows the cost of restoring relationship with God. Now, the sacrificial system in Leviticus does present God as instituting sacrifice. We should not dodge that. But the scripture also pushes back on sacrifice from within itself. Look at the tension. God gives sacrifice in Leviticus, but God critiques sacrifices in Hosea 6:6. Write that down. God says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. God rejects empty sacrifices in Isaiah 1:11-17. I want to take a second and read that because it's important to our understanding. Isaiah 1:11-17. Just give me 1 second here, and I'll see if I can't pull it up. Isaiah 1. This is what God says in Isaiah 1. Let's start with verse 11. God says, what to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and fatted beasts. I did not delight in the blood of bulls and of lambs or of goats. When you come to appear before me, who asked this from your hand? Trampled my courts no more. Bringing offerings is futile. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and calling of convocations. I can't endure solemn assemblies with iniquity. Your new moons and your appointed festivals, my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary. I'm burdened with them. When you stretch out your hand, I'll hide my face. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. For your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves. Make yourself clean. Remove your evil deeds, and from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rescue the oppressed. Defend the orphans. Plead for the widow. This is what God says. That tells us something very important. The Bible is not representing a single static view. It's showing a people growing in their understanding of God. In the ancient world, every culture used sacrifice. So instead of starting from scratch, God meets people where they are and reshapes the meaning. Not human sacrifice, but animal sacrifice. Not appeasing random gods, but restoring covenant relationship. Not magic, but moral accountability. In other words, God doesn't invent violence. God redirects a violent system towards meaning, limits, and ultimate transformation. I believe that God does not change. We change in our understanding of God. If sacrifice was a language people was already understood, then God wasn't changing. God was communicating. God met people in a system that they recognized, but kept pushing them beyond where they were. That's why the prophet starts saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And Jesus shows up that God shows us rather that God's heart was never about ritual violence, but about love, justice, and restoration. The change is not in God. The change is in how clearly we see God. Before the sacrifice showed up, violence was already here. Cain killed Abel. So the question isn't, why does God introduce violence? It's more honest to ask, how does God deal with a world where violence is already embedded? Sacrifice becomes a way of saying sin costs something real. Life is disrupted. Restoration requires acknowledgement, not desire. It is 7:59 and I'm going to stop there. I'm going to send you questions for next week's lesson, and we are going to go back and kind of examine this idea of sacrifice and what God requires in order to have restoration between us and God and abolishment of sin. Are there questions? All right. Very good. Then I will send you a new list of questions for next week. And I expect to see you right back here, same bat time, same bat station. Let's have a quick word of prayer before we go. Eternal and loving God, we thank you for our time together tonight and ask that you would continue to push us, challenge us, continue to help us to understand you just a little bit more clearly so we can be better representatives of you in the world. God, in places where sin abounds, help us to be your peacemakers, your disruptors of sin. Help us, dear God, to be the people you've called us to be, living in the way that Jesus has taught us to live. And we pray that you would bless us and keep us for that goal and for your purpose in our life. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you all. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you back here next